This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 209. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. I am so grateful and honored to get to spend this special time with you. Thank you for tuning in again to Your Anxiety Toolkit. Oh, how are you? How are you doing? How are you really? Thank you again for being here. I am really feeling this deep need to check in on people lately, just to see, how are you? Things are hard. Things are still hard. I actually got this reminder on Facebook. It was like a memory, and it was of this time last year, and it was about checking in with people. And I was like, yes, isn't that so interesting? We're still in this place where things are still really, really hard, and we have to keep checking up on our people. So I wanted to first check in. How are you? Do a little check-in for yourself. Today's episode is, oh my goodness, I have to share with you. This episode lifted my heart so much. And so I'll quickly share, I have the podcast, and I have my social media, and I have CBT School, and I have my staff who treat people with OCD. And every now and then I lose touch with whether or not I'm making an impact. Every now and then I lose touch with whether or not I'm making an impact. How much of an impact? Where am I making an impact? Is it helpful for people? Which is why your reviews and your feedback is always so welcomed. But this episode really filled my heart. Today we have the amazing Taylor Stadtlander. She is a licensed social worker. She's on social media. Her handle is at A Cup of Mindful Tea. Such a cool handle. And she had posted about how CBT School had helped her and how ERP School had helped her. And I checked in and was like, oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And then I thought, you know what? I really want to hear this story. So I invited her onto the podcast. And you guys, this is such an inspiring story of somebody who did the work, is doing the work, is showing up, is, recovering from such a difficult disorder. And I just am so honored that I got to be a part of that without even knowing I was a part of it, and it just filled me up so much. So I am going to let you guys listen to this incredibly inspiring story. Not only is it so inspiring, but she drops some amazing tools and concepts and wisdom, and hopefully for you, it gives you a ton of hope. So I am just so thrilled to share with you this interview with Taylor. Do go over and follow her because she is a rock star. So I'm going to take you straight to the show. Before we do that, let's do the I did a hard thing. We could say that Taylor's story is an I did a hard thing, but I just love doing the I did a hard thing. So today we will get to, this one is from Marty, and it said, I suffered from severe generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety, and I haven't worked in over a year. This week, I took a temporary job and was terrified even to go on the first day, but I did it, and I have been going all week. I don't like the job, and I probably won't stay, but at least I'm practicing exposure each day. Amazing, Marty. Oh my goodness. This is just so amazing. Congratulations on doing such a hard thing. The review of the week is from Huete Mummy. And it says, facing our fears. I love this podcast so much. It is hard to wait for the next episode to come out. I feel so empowered after listening to this podcast. I look forward to doing hard things thanks to the confidence gained by listening to Kim. Thank you so much. You are so welcome, you guys. I just love you. How amazing are you guys? Really? Like, could it be any cooler? Could it be any more incredible? What a community. So proud of you all. I get a little emotional. I'm sorry. It just gets me feeling so fulfilled. I'm going to send you right over to the episode and I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you next week. All right. Well, welcome. I am so excited to have here with me Taylor Stadtlander.
Yes, thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, thank you for being here. I am so excited about this interview. You're someone I have watched on social media, and it's really cool because out of there, I realized you were someone who had been through CBT school, and I just love sort of hearing the story of how people get to me. I love that story. So thank you for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me a little bit about you and your mental health and mental wellness journey as much as you want to share. Tell us.
So I'll start with, I am an OCD therapist right now. And I start by saying that because I honestly, if you were to tell me when I was in high school that I would have become an OCD therapist, I would have laughed at you, because at that time was really when my OCD started in high school. Of course, now, like, knowing what OCD is, I can look back and I can see it, like, definitely symptoms back as young as like 8 or 9 years old. But when I was in high school was really when I had my sophomore year, like a pretty intense onset of compulsions. And then, of course, the intrusive thoughts, and it really was all consuming but the interesting part, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, is it was something I kept very hidden, right? Or I at least tried to. So the earliest compulsions I had were checking compulsions. So it was, these intense long rituals before I would go to bed, checking that the door is locked, the stove was off, all safety things. I felt this immense amount of responsibility. And I remember thinking, like, where did this come from? Like, I didn't, like, one day I was just, so concerned with safety and all these different things. But no one would have known, other than, of course, my family who I lived with, who, and my sister who I shared a room with, who, of course, saw me getting up multiple times at night, to recheck things. But from the outside, it looked like I had everything together, right? Like, I was the A student, honors classes, volleyball captain, lacrosse captain, and just kind of kept that facade, that, like, that picture perfect, high schooler. And I did end up going to a therapist, and she wasn't an OCD specialist, but I have to say I got very lucky because I actually have some of the worksheets that she used with me back when I was 15. And it is in a sense ERP. So, I was very lucky in that sense that even though I wasn't seeing a specialist, because I don't think any of us knew what was going on, to even see an OCD specialist, I did get to kind of, and it helped. And that's where I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to go to college and become, at least major in social work. So went to college, majored in social work, got my master's in social work, and my OCD pretty much went away. And I thought I was cured, or whatever that means. And I thought that, okay, that was a chapter of my life. And now, for whatever reason I had to go through that, now I'll become a therapist and help other people. I say that because I had no idea what was coming. My first year out of grad school, I began working, and I had the most intense relapse of OCD ever. It came back stronger than ever. This time we call it pure O. So, like, mainly intrusive thoughts. And I had no idea what ERP was. And it's kind of sad because I went through grad school for social work and I never, we never talked about that. And I remember this one day, and this is kind of circling back to even how I found you, was I had stayed home from work because I was just for like a mental health day. And, I didn't want to be on my phone because going on social media was triggering, watching TV was triggering, like all these different things. But I was like, you know what? I'm sitting at home. I might as well turn on the TV. So I turn on the TV and an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians is on. And I am a fan of that show. So shout out to them. And I remember watching and I was like kind of listening, half not. I think I was like trying to take a nap. And, one of the family members had this OCD specialist on the show. And I remember like pausing the TV because they had the name of the OCD specialist on the TV. And I like wrote it down and it was Shiva from the Center of Anxiety and OCD. So I was like, okay, like, let me Google that. Like, that was the first time I've ever even heard of an OCD specialist. So stopped watching the show, went on my phone, Googled her name and her Instagram came up and I just started scrolling. And it was like my world, like my eyes were just open. I was like, oh my gosh, like other people have OCD, other people, and there's a treatment, ERP. And then I just kept scrolling. And then funny enough, I came across your page, Kimberly, and through that. And that's where I discovered CBT school. And, that was really, so anyway, long story short, at that time, I wasn't able to afford an OCD specialist. So I was seeing a different therapist from high school, because now, by this time I was married on my own insurance, trying to navigate that. And in the back of my head, I knew that I needed to see an OCD specialist. I just, again, couldn't afford it. So I had a conversation with my husband. I'm like, look, I'm going to pay for the CBT course. And I said, I know it seems like a lot of money, but it's really not. If I was going to see an OCD specialist, this is probably what one session would cost. And that's how I learned about ERP. Like, that's your course is how I learned about ERP. So it honestly traces back to Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I love telling that story because it's so weird, and honestly, that changed my life. Like, because learning ERP, it was like, it finally clicked that, okay, like this, because I was just applying like CBT techniques, right? Like, think of a red stop sign when you have an intrusive thought, like thought stopping and things like that. And as we know, like that was making it so much worse. So I just like dove into your course and taught myself through your course what ERP is, which then led me to, seeing that it worked and then wanting to specialize in ERP and now working with clients who have OCD. And it's really been an amazing journey, to say the least.
Wow. I'm like nearly in tears hearing this story. Oh my goodness. How funny. Your story is like gone from reality TV to here. And that's so cool. Isn't that just blows me away, right?
Well, and it really goes to show, like, I know that there can be, negative sides like technology and Instagram, but like for me, like most of, if not all of my education initially about OCD and ERP was from Instagram accounts like yours or Shiva's, right? And it was like, again, like I knew that, okay, this can't replace therapy, but it was such a good in between for me, especially being in the place where I was like, okay, trying to navigate, because it can feel like you're stuck when you either can't find an OCD specialist or you can't afford it. And I know what that feels like. So to have that in between, not as a replacement, but just kind of like as a bridging point, was so helpful for me.
Wow. So, and for the listeners, I've not heard that story. Like, this is as new to me as to you. So this is so cool. Okay. So I'd actually I'm so curious. So when you took ERP school, were you like, she's crazy, I'm not doing that? Or what was your first take on that?
What? I think I was at the point where I was so determined to find relief, I was willing to do anything. And, I had like researched about ERP, like before I took your course. I wasn't like oh, I'm just going to trust this random lady. I don't
This
know.
random lady.
Right. So, I did do my own research, obviously. And again, like I'm in the field and I have a degree in social work. It's just so interesting to me that that was kind of like not discussed. And I think that's lacking in a lot of programs.
Yeah.
So once I like researched it myself, I was like, okay, this is the evidence-based treatment. This is the gold standard. Like, looks like I got to do this. And I just remember I would come home. I was working at the time at a partial hospital program. And I would come home from work and that would be my routine. Like I would get like my little notebook out, I'd pull my laptop out and I treated it as if I was, again, like I know it doesn't replace therapy, but I treat it as if I was like in an intensive program. Like I would like spend, an hour or so going through, your videos and then you printing out the worksheets. And that's just what I did. And I just started to do it. I had before that a brief, like very minimal understanding of exposures. And I think I was like trying to do them on my own, but through your course, I was able to understand like the response prevention piece, like I was just like exposing myself to like all these things and then like leaving myself in a tailspin. But yeah, and I see this again, like even in my own clients now that like, there's just, I think a certain point that you reach that, yes, it's scary to take the step to start ERP, but because we're so determined to not feel the way we're feeling, it makes it so worth it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm like seriously close to tears listening to your story. So thank you for sharing that with me. I mean, wow, what an honor that I get to be a part of your journey. But how cool that you were the journey. Like you did all this work. So what was that like? Like, okay, so you said you would come home from work and you would sit down and you would go through it. Like, tell us a little bit about how you set your own.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I mentioned this. I was still seeing a therapist. So what was funny is I would come to my sessions and like be teaching her about ERP.
I bet.
And because in a way, I was becoming like this mini expert, right? And as I think a lot of our clients do, because it is such a unique treatment, right? You do have to kind of become an expert. So yeah, I mean, I remember using that worksheet where, okay, identify the what if fear, then list out the compulsions. And I remember at the time I was like, all right, I need to print out like 10 of these because I have so many themes right now. I remember doing that. And then, like I would just kind of pick away at I would rate them and then go through the whole process. And really as if I was going through ERP treatment, that's what I was doing. Like the same process I do now with my clients is just kind of what I did. And I'm so lucky and blessed to have a background in mental health to kind of like have that and even like the resources that I could have, kind of had like self-taught like myself ERP, because I know that that's not everyone's situation. But yeah, like that's just kind of like, and then what was really helpful, and I think this is really important to mention, is my husband, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, like we all have our one person who like we seek reassurance from, right? So like when I was still living at home, that person was my mom. Once I got married, it became my husband. And so he had to learn a lot about OCD treatment and ERP and not providing reassurance. So the poor thing, I would have him sit down and like watch your videos with me. And he would, and he is amazing and just the best support system. But that was really helpful because again, not, even if you are in therapy and doing this as a supplement to therapy, to be able to have those resources to watch again and again, like once you buy the course, you have it. And I still reference it to this day. Like if I'm, for myself, or even if I'm working with something with a client. So that piece was huge because then I could say like, hey, look, like this is the science behind what I'm doing. Like, this is why, you can't give me reassurance and things like that.
Right. This is so cool. And it's so cool that he was able to watch it and wasn't intimidated by the whole process. I mean, he probably was, but he still went through with it, which was so cool.
100%. And I think, yes. And I think like, because I'm like this was about 2 years ago, almost to the date, actually, And, because now I can like look back on it, I think I do lose like the anxiety that I had with starting it. And I'm sure like him, like wondering like, what the heck are you doing? Like, but I think that's so important to have your partner or just your support system understand ERP, because it can be very confusing to the outside. Like if you're doing exposures or right. And, what was very upsetting and hard for me that I really had to come to accept is a lot of my harm obsessions were unfortunately targeted around him, right? So I'd be writing these scripts and, I would feel this guilt, this horrible amount of guilt and shame, similar to what I felt back in high school when I was trying to hide my compulsions was, here I have this amazing supportive husband and I'm writing these scripts, right? So I would want to try and explain that, and him understanding it, I think made the whole process so much easier. For sure.
And those scripts can be hard, right? Like I even remember.
I think that's the hardest part for me.
Yeah. I even remember recording that and looking into the camera and saying like, you need to write a story about this. And I do this with my patients all the time, but thinking like, why would anyone trust me? Like it's such a hard thing to do when you haven't, so that's really amazing that you did that. The good news, and I'll tell you this, you're the first person to know this, is we just renewed the whole Imaginal script module. It's 3 times as long now, and they're
amazing.
Yeah, so you're the first to know. By the time this airs, everyone will know. But because we tripled the length of it because people had so many questions about that process. So, yeah.
I think it's in fact, I had a session yesterday with one of my amazing clients, and she's fairly new in the treatment, and we were introducing the idea of scripts. And you're absolutely right. Like when you're describing it, you're like, what am I saying? Like, this sounds horrible. Like I was like, all right, we are going to pretty much write out your worst fear coming true in as much detail as possible. And she was like, what the heck is going on? And, sometimes I have to like take myself like back to that starting point, especially with working with clients, because now I'm like, I have an intrusive thought come up. All right, I know I have to go write a script when I get home, right? But like, so for me, it's become second nature. But I think like remembering like how painful it was the first several times to actually write down those thoughts, and then not only write down them, but like say them out loud and listen to them. And, that I was reminded yesterday, like I can't lose sight of like how painful that is initially. But then how rewarding it is once you realize it works,
Yeah. You get so much bang for your buck, don't you? When you do it, you use those. This is so cool. You're obviously a rock star, right? Like so exciting, right? And I can't tell you how much this brings me such joy to hear. What would you say to somebody who's starting this process? What was important to you? What got you through? Like, tell us all your wisdom.
I think the biggest thing would to know that you're not alone. Because I remember that was the biggest thing for me. I thought before I knew what OCD and ERP was, like I thought that I was the only person on the planet experiencing these intrusive thoughts, these, horrible, violent images or sexual intrusive thoughts or whatever it was. So first and foremost, knowing that you're not alone, that there are so many of us who have experienced this, not only experienced the pain of it, but have gone through and are now in recovery. And that, you don't have to let fear dictate, the choices that you make, because that's how I lived my life. Like I avoided things because of my OCD, so I wouldn't be triggered. I let fear make the decisions for a lot of my life. And when you do go through ERP treatment, you get to be in control again, and you get to live again according to your values. For example, I've always wanted to be a mom, and I've always dreamed of having kids. And I remember so many times OCD in so many different ways that I can't even get into would, say, well, oh, you could never do that. Right. And I'm actually in my first trimester right now, which is so exciting and has been such an incredible journey. That's a completely different topic for another day with handling my OCD attached to that. But, I was thinking and reflecting about it the other day of just like, wow, like I now get to live life according to my values and not let fear and OCD make the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though the treatment seems so scary and weird at first, like it is so worth it because it works. And that's why I wanted to become really a specialist in this specific field, because I fell in love with the treatment. I fell in love with the fact that it gives people their lives back. And that's so cool to witness. So you're not alone. You're also not a bad person because of the thoughts that you're having. And I'll, briefly share. So I'm a Christian, and I know that a lot of the thoughts that I've had, for a long time, I just thought, okay, I'm a horrible person, or I'm a sinner, or, and whatever your faith is, whatever, spirituality or anything, whatever morals you have, just know that you're not your intrusive thoughts. You are just a person with thoughts, and that's it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So number one, congratulations on when I just love when people say, I have OCD about it, but I did it anyway.
I know it's
so cool.
Really talk about like facing your fears. It's like the wildest.
Right. And then the second piece where you're again speaking from a place of values, even your religion, yes, I'm sure got attacked during that process.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really hard to keep the faith when you're being harassed by these thoughts. So yeah, I just love that. Now, were there what motivated you to keep going, right? Mm-hmm. So how, besides you said just the deep wish to be better and well, how did you keep getting up and was there lots of getting up and falling down, or did you just get up every day?
Oh my gosh. In fact, there's times where I still feel like I'm picking myself up because, and I'm so happy you brought that up, because that was something that I wasn't prepared for. The feelings of relapsing, I call it, right? Where you feel like, oh my goodness, my symptoms have gone away. I'm, whatever. And then it's it kind of hits you like a ton of bricks. And I always find that it comes back so strong, and it can be really discouraging at first. And, I've even experienced that with the first couple of weeks of this pregnancy, right? Of just wow, I thought really, I thought we were over this. And even themes coming back from when I was 15 or 16, I'm okay, looks like we have to deal with this again. And, I'm able to kind of laugh about it now, but in the moment, it's really hard. And so I think the biggest thing for me that I try to keep myself reminded of in those moments where I do feel because it feels like you're taking a step backwards, in a sense sometimes. And I always try to remind myself that so much can change in a matter of a day, and that this is temporary. And even the worst moments of, my ruminating or obsessing, or, the nights where I would literally spend hours completing compulsions, they always passed, if that makes sense. It always, it sounds so cliche, but the sun always rose again. I always got another chance. And, I would say that I am a naturally driven and motivated person. So I think that definitely did help me. But that's not to say that there weren't times where, it's a hopeless feeling when you are living in your own personal hell of intrusive thoughts. The way I remember describing it to the first therapist I went to is that I was, and I don't play tennis, by the way, but that I was I picture myself in a tennis court with a tennis racket, and like someone just throwing balls at me. And those are the intrusive thoughts. And I whack one away and another one comes back. Mm-hmm. So it's exhausting, but being reminded that and also now too, and I wrote this down, I definitely wanted to talk about this, was you have to find the community support. And that has been so vital for me. And again, thank you, Instagram. I've been able to connect with so many people who have OCD or a related disorder, and, who I, text or DM and are now some of my closest friends. And we hold each other accountable on days where it's because OCD can be really weird sometimes. And it's really nice to have people who understand and have been there. So that's really helpful for me too, on days where it's man, it just feels like I can't pick myself up.
Yeah. So important, right? It's so important. In fact, I'll tell you a story. As a client of mine who I've been seeing for a while could do the therapy without me, and she knows it as well as I do. And we kind of hit a roadblock and it coming up like, I just feel so alone. And
Mm.
that's having support and other people with similar issues was a game changer for her, right? And I think we're lucky in that there are Facebook groups and Instagram and support groups out there that are so helpful.
Totally. And, that's one of the reasons I actually decided about a year ago to create a mental health Instagram, because I wanted to, I knew how much Instagram and connecting using that platform helped me. And I just wanted to, I literally remember saying, like, even if it helps one person. And, at first it was really scary sharing some of the things that, talking about the more taboo themes and different things like that, and thinking like, oh man, like what are my coworkers thinking of me or my family members when I post this? But what's been so rewarding is like countless people have reached out to me who either I know and I've either grown up with my whole life, or people across the globe really, of just saying like, hey, like, thank you for letting me know I'm not alone. And to me, that makes it totally all worth it. So it's so important to like find that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there anything else that you felt was key for you? Something that you want people to know?
I think that it's so important to like, a huge piece of it too was the like incorporating ACT, like acceptance and commitment therapy, which I also believe I learned from one of your podcasts. So thank you. And that was a huge piece for me too, because again, I think that like, be very honest, I didn't even say the words OCD until like 2 years ago. Like I knew in my head that I met the criteria in the DSM, but I never, like that label for me was so scary. I don't really know why, like looking back, but maybe because it was just so unknown. So a lot of the work that I've had to do personally that's been really helpful is just acceptance of any emotion, really, but especially of like learning that acceptance doesn't mean that you have to love something. And it ties into like tolerating uncertainty, right? Like we don't like tolerating. I was talking about this with a client yesterday, like tolerating is not like an endearing word. If someone says like, oh, I tolerate that person, right? Like we don't, that's not a compliment. And, just like we're not being asked to love uncertainty or love the fact that we have OCD or whatever we're struggling with, but just like learning to sit with it and tolerate it has been an absolute game changer for me. I mean, that was as much as like the exposures and response prevention was like so new to me, that whole piece too was like a game changer.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's such an important piece, right? And because there's so much grief that comes with having OCD too, and the stigma associated. I know I've heard so many people say the same thing. They had to work through the diagnosis before they could even consider
100%. And I also had a lot of, anger in two ways towards the fact that I had to deal with this. I always thought, and, of course, I think a lot of us think this about anything else. I was like, if only I just had, I say just with quotation, like just had anxiety and not OCD, or just had depression, or like that would be so much easier to deal with, which I know is ridiculous. But in the moment, it's like, I think like whatever we're going through just seems so impossible. And then the other piece of the anger was just like the misuse of people saying like, oh, I'm so OCD, or seeing it, displayed on TV or on social media in the wrong way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if only you knew what OCD was, you would never say that.
Right.
So now like it's been cool because I can turn that frustration more into like advocacy and education. Yeah. But that was a huge like hurdle to jump to.
Yeah. Well, especially because you're over here tolerating OCDs and then other people are celebrating, and it just feels like a kick in the face.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Number one, brings me to tears that we get to meet and chat and full circle. I think that is just so beautiful. And I'm so impressed with the work that you're doing. So thank you. Tell me where people can hear more about you or follow you and so forth.
Okay, sure. So my Instagram is A Cup of Mindful Tea. And there you can also find, so I definitely share my personal story, but just also ERP tips. I'm also very big on, holistic finding. So obviously I'm all for, medication has been a huge part of my story as well and helpful, but I also love finding natural ways and different ways that have helped my anxiety and just building my toolkit. So I share a lot about that on there as well. So yeah, I would love to connect with you guys on social media for sure.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I saw your pregnancy announcement, like I was with my kids and I was like, woohoo! And they were like, what? And I'm like, oh, it's just somebody I've never met, but I'm awesome. So excited for it.
Isn't that so great? I know, I love it. I feel the same way for other people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Number one, thank you for coming on the show. I love how that sort of creates itself organically. And number two, thank you for sharing this, because I think this will hopefully give some people some hope. We were overwhelmingly encouraged to have people with stories of their recovery. So I think this is a really wonderful start of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I've been listening to your podcast for 2 years now, and it's been such an encouragement for me and such a huge form of education and help. So this was truly special. So thank you.
Thank you.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.